Hello, this is Steve Kubby. I'd like to welcome you to Kubby TV. And today we'll be joined by Steph Sherer, the Executive Director and Founder of Americans for Safe Access. This is a third interview and probably the most provocative because we're going to ask Steph today about this issue that we learned about just a few weeks ago where activists are accusing ASA and other leading organizations of dominating the scene, drowning out the voices of patients and local reform organizations, and really functioning as what these activists refer to as the Marijuana Mafia.
These organizations, because they're able to raise hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, they can package themselves and market themselves however they want to the general population. So to one group of people, they're the ones you go to that are going to save the day, and they're going to help you, and they're going to do all this murky and ugly political work for you, when in essence what they are trying to do is carve out a niche for a handful of their friends to be able to acquire medical marijuana permits in the state of California and no one else.
There's something that happens in a legislative process, right, where once someone puts down legislation and starts talking about your issue, you can't just say, I don't like that, I'm not going to talk about it. You can't just plug your ears and close your eyes and hope that it's just going to go away, because it's not the way it works. And in California, we have an unusual situation that there's a federal program that's been going on there since 1979 that actually is here in Washington as well, which is the DEA's marijuana eradication program. Right? California and Washington, Michigan, Tennessee, Kentucky, these are the states that have been the agricultural centers for marijuana production. And what that means is that in those states, there is a culture of eradicating this plant, right? That doesn't exist in Rhode Island. It doesn't exist in Colorado. Until there was medical marijuana, there was not a marijuana industry in Colorado, right? Until that law passed, this was not something that DEA was working with local police on. California produces and continues to produce the largest majority of marijuana in the United States. And so since 1979, the DEA has been giving money to the state of California. The U.S. attorneys have been prosecuting Californians. And there's really this culture of eradicating marijuana. That despite the fact that we've had the law since 1996, law enforcement haven't gotten out of that spirit, right? U.S. attorneys haven't stopped prosecuting people. And so at the legislature, in that conversation, we've got not only patients from the South that are looking for any solution, that are really feeling at this point desperate for some type of access and feel like they keep getting rolled on even further. We also have very well-funded law enforcement that are spending a lot of resources in Sacramento to try to remove our rights from SB 420 and Proposition 215. And so California legislature is unique. And so Americans for Safe Access would never do anything to put people in harm's way, right? We have been in situations where we're looking at a piece of legislation and knowing that while it may not be perfect, there may be tens of thousands of people that are going to be helped that wouldn't be helped otherwise, right? And there's also sort of an arrogance in California that it's from Northern California, that and I understand that what's there, they've fought for those rights, but I don't feel like they have a lot of empathy for what's going on in the rest of the state, and really looking at their brothers and sisters down south and saying, yeah, how can we all help, right? Instead of just saying, I've got what I want in my city, screw the rest of the state, right? And so for anyone who doesn't like the legislation, the reason we have town hall meetings is so people can come and we can have this dialogue, right? Every legislative cycle, anytime we've been a part of legislation, we've held consensus meetings. I've held meetings with 75 people on the phone, going through every single one and discussing each and every item. And so guess laws aren't perfect, but if you want to see your voice coming in, it's not helpful to try to discredit me. You should come to the table and let's talk about it, and let's figure out how to make safe access a reality for all Californians. So there's this really odd grouping of accusations that myself and some of my board members that we're a cover to go around and get licenses for our friends to run dispensaries. And I don't own a dispensary. I've never owned a dispensary. And less than 8% of the budget of Americans for Safe Access comes from the medical cannabis industry. Don Duncan, who's on my board, who is probably the hardest working man I've ever met in my life and gets a lot of abuse from this movement, also does not own any dispensaries. He's on the board of 2 dispensaries, and he actually was a co-owner of Berkeley Patients Group, and he went down to Los Angeles and he open sourced to anyone who wanted to know how to run a dispensary. He, for free, gave them that information and helped them open up, right? There's nothing evil about Don Duncan. I get really offended by people calling him the mafia. It's pretty tacky. I've never seen someone work as hard as him. And he's never taken a cent from Americans for Safe Access. He's a volunteer, absolute volunteer. And I don't know why people have chosen to abuse him. He's been a paid consultant before, and he's helped people open dispensaries. But there's no mastermind monopoly in my mind at Americans for Safe Access, right? At Americans for Safe Access, we believe that if an individual wants to grow cannabis, that the only regulations that should be a part of their lives are the regulations that already exist in their society. And what I mean by that is, if you want to grow tomatoes in your yard, that's fine if you're just going to consume them, as long as you don't hurt the earth, right? There's all these environmental laws. And as long as you don't annoy your neighbors, right? Which is if you grow a bunch of tomatoes and there's a bunch of rats, right? Like, same thing with cannabis. You can't do something that's going to harm your neighbors or annoy them. If a small group of friends wants to get together and grow tomatoes and they're just going to share them with themselves and not sell them, there should be no regulations there, except for what already exists. Don't hurt the earth, or whatever those environmental laws are, and don't annoy your neighbors. Right? Don't be a nuisance. But as soon as you begin to sell a product, then there needs to be regulations. And I'm not making up something special for cannabis. The consumer regulations in this country were created to protect consumers, right? That there is this constant war that's bigger than medical cannabis between capitalism and the protection of human rights, right? And without regulations, I know that some of our libertarian friends don't always agree with me here, but I believe in consumer rights, and I believe that capitalism on its own will not see human beings and will make decisions that will harm them. And we see this, in recalls all the time. We know that people will put lead in children's toys unless they're told not to. And so, in the same way that agriculture in this country is regulated, that if you're going to sell tomatoes to the public, that there are rules about how you grow them, what you use in them, what you spray them with, the nutritional facts you put in them, right? I believe in those rights, not as a way to harm the medical cannabis industry, but to protect the patients that are using that product. And so, if my critics think that that I want to regulate medical cannabis, they're right. I absolutely want to regulate a marketplace where goods are being sold. If you want to grow it yourself, for yourself, I don't need to be in your home. I don't want to be in your home. I don't think anybody else should be in your home. If you and a group of patients want to grow together, right? I think that the government has no business being in your home. But when you bring a product to market, then I absolutely believe there should be regulations. And so if I'm criticized for that, then I think that's fair. Absolutely. But there's not a single thing that Americans for Safe Access is doing that is trying to put people in jeopardy. There's nothing that we are doing that is trying to use regulations to push people out of the market. In fact, I spend a lot of my time working with groups like the American Herbal Products Association, the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia, to make sure that any regulations that are created are based on regulations that already exist for herbal medicines, and that there are never regulations that are written that would put people out of business, right? We fight against any regulation that is impossible to meet. And so, for instance, there's been a push towards testing of cannabis. We are pro testing for contaminants, for molds, mildews, absolutely, right? And the science is solid there. But when it comes to testing for potency, the science isn't quite there yet. It's almost there, but it's not there. And so we never support regulations that are going to be impossible for people to meet. But once the potency information is available, yeah, I think it should be mandated that if you're going to sell medical cannabis, that it needs to be tested. That you have to be able to tell people where it came from, what's in it, and what it's going to do to them. So, I, excuse me, I'm also often accused of being part of the 80% that supports medical cannabis. I am, right? I don't come from a cannabis subculture. That's not my background. Being a medical cannabis patient was my first exposure, really, to that community, and I'm grateful for the innovation. But there are millions of Americans that can be helped by this medicine, and we live in society, and we need access, and access for someone living in an urban area doesn't look like access for someone who's living in Mendocino County. And there are ways that people get their medicine that they're used to, and there are ways that would make them very uncomfortable. And so I believe in community-based access, which means that the way that people access their medicine should look like the community they're used to, right? So if you feel more comfortable being in a sterile environment, right, that looks like a doctor's office, I love walking into a dispensary that looks like that, right? Because that's what I know some of my friends would be more comfortable in. That some of my friends that are patients. For people who come from a certain subculture, I've definitely seen dispensaries that serve subcultures, and I think that's great. And I don't care about that part. The part that I care about is how they're interacting with their community, right? So having signs that offend people instead of looking like their environment and their community. But no matter whether it looks like something out of the 60s or whether it looks like something out of Starbucks, if you're selling a product to patients, it has to be regulated. And I am fighting every day for the day that I do not have to think about my medication anymore. That's when I know that we've won. When I can go back to my life and know that the only time I have to think about my medication is when I have to take it.
Once again, I'd like to thank our special guest, Steph Sherer, for our interview. This has been part 3 of a 4-part interview. Tomorrow's interview brings it all together because tomorrow we ask Steph, how do we create unity within the community? So join us tomorrow. This has been Steve Kubby at KubbyTV.com. You can also catch us on PotTV.com. cannabisculture.com, and other premium sites on the internet. Until tomorrow, this is Steve Kubby wishing you a great 215 day.
So heavy where I stand. The indecision builds within my twisted